The hall was quiet now. The crowd had gone home, the applause had faded, and the lights above the stage flickered softly in the empty room. The only sound left was the faint squeak of a mop and the soft hum of an old man working his way across the wooden floor. He wasn't old in years, but his face carried lines of tiredness that made him look older than he really was. Every night when the world slept, he came here, not to perform, not to watch the shows, but to clean up after them. He worked as a janitor at the city's most famous music academy. It was a place filled with bright lights, expensive instruments, and young talents chasing their dreams. For him, though, it was just a job that paid the bills. Every morning he woke up before the sun, packed lunch for his little daughter, walked her to school, and then went straight to work. Cleaning floors, dusting seats, emptying trash bins. It was a simple routine, and he never complained. Most people at the academy barely noticed him. The students were too busy practicing or showing off their skills. The teachers were always in a rush, and the visitors walked past without even a glance. He blended into the background, like a quiet shadow that moved through the hall every night, making sure it was spotless for the next day's performances. But there was something different about him, something no one saw. Every time he reached the stage and stood beside the grand piano, he paused. He would stare at it for a few seconds, his hands resting on the edge of the polished wood. The piano glowed under the soft lights, and he could see his reflection in it, a man in a faded uniform, holding a mop instead of sheet music. Sometimes he smiled sadly at that reflection. When no one was around, he liked to lift the cover slightly and press one key. Just one. A single note would echo through the hall, clean, rich, and full of memories. It reminded him of another time, another version of himself long before life took a different turn. Years ago, before he became the man with the mop, he was someone else entirely. He had been a musician, a pianist who dreamed of playing on grand stages just like this one. Back then, music was everything to him. He used to spend hours practicing, losing himself in the keys, pouring his heart into every note. Music had been his escape, his language, his way of feeling alive. But life, as it often does, had other plans. He fell in love, got married, and started a family. For a while, it was beautiful. His wife was gentle and full of warmth, and when their little daughter was born, it felt like life had reached its sweetest point. But then everything changed. His wife fell ill suddenly, an illness that took her strength slowly and left him watching helplessly. The medical bills piled up, and his dream of becoming a full-time musician slipped further away. When she passed away, the world went silent for him. The piano keys that once brought him joy now felt heavy with sorrow. Every note reminded him of her smile, her laughter, her presence beside him when he played. After that, he stopped performing. He sold his old piano to pay for the funeral and moved into a small apartment with his daughter. She was just a little girl then, too young to understand why her father cried at night when he thought she was asleep. He promised himself he'd do whatever it took to take care of her. That's how he ended up working at the academy, a place that reminded him of everything he had lost, yet gave him just enough to survive. Even though his hands no longer danced across keys, he still carried the rhythm in his heart. Sometimes, while sweeping the stage, he would hum softly to himself. The tunes were old, simple melodies he had composed years ago. His daughter, who sometimes came to wait for him after school, would sit quietly in the last row, swinging her legs and listening. "Papa, that's pretty," she would say with a smile. He'd laugh softly. "Just something from long ago," he'd reply, trying to hide the ache behind his voice. To her, he was a hard-working dad who made everything feel safe and steady. She didn't know how much he had sacrificed, how much music still lived inside him. And he didn't tell her. He didn't want her to feel that her father was someone who had failed. He wanted her to see him as someone who kept going no matter what. One evening, after a big recital at the academy, he was cleaning as usual. The audience had left behind programs, coffee cups, and the faint scent of perfume that still lingered in the air. He gathered everything quietly, humming under his breath while his daughter read a storybook in the back. When he reached the stage, the grand piano was still uncovered. The lid was open and the keys gleamed under the dim light. He stopped again, unable to help himself. He looked around to make sure no one was there. The hall was empty, silent. He took a deep breath and gently touched one key. The sound echoed softly, clear, beautiful, familiar. His daughter looked up from her book and smiled. "Papa, play something," she whispered. He froze for a moment, It had been so long since he played a full piece. "It's late," he said softly, half to himself. "We should go home." "Please," she said, her voice small but full of hope. "Just one song." He looked at her, her big eyes, her tired little face, the same face that kept him going every single day. And in that moment, something inside him stirred. The part of him that had gone quiet for so many years suddenly wanted to speak again. He set the mop aside, sat slowly on the piano bench, and placed his fingers gently on the keys. His hands trembled a little. The feeling of the cool ivory beneath his fingertips brought back so many memories, nights of music, laughter, love, and loss. For a few seconds, he just sat there, eyes closed, listening to the silence. Then, without thinking too much, he began to play. The first few notes came out uncertain, almost shy. But soon they flowed naturally, like a river remembering its path. The melody was soft and tender, filled with emotion. His daughter's eyes widened as she listened. She had never heard him play before, not like this. The music floated through the empty hall, wrapping the air in something almost magical. Every note told a story, of dreams lost, of love remembered, of pain carried quietly through the years. For him, it wasn't just music. It was a conversation with the past. It was his heart finding its voice again. He didn't notice that one of the teachers had walked back into the hall to retrieve a forgotten folder. She stopped in her tracks, stunned by the sound coming from the stage. The man she'd seen every day sweeping floors was sitting at the piano, his eyes closed, lost in music that touched something deep inside anyone who heard it. She stood silently, afraid to interrupt. When the final note faded, he opened his eyes slowly, unaware of the small audience that had gathered at the door. A few students, a teacher and his daughter, who was now clapping softly, her face glowing with pride. He smiled awkwardly, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," he said, standing up quickly. "I shouldn't have touched it. I'll finish cleaning right away." But the teacher shook her head, still amazed. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. "A long time ago," he said simply. "Before life got in the way." The teacher smiled gently. "You have a gift," she said. "You shouldn't hide it." He looked down, unsure what to say. "It's just something I used to love," he murmured. "Now it's just memories." As he packed up his cleaning supplies, his daughter ran up and hugged him tightly. "Papa," she whispered. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." He smiled and kissed the top of her head. "Thank you, little one," he said softly. "It's our secret, okay?" She nodded with a grin, but deep inside she already knew it wasn't just a secret. Something had changed that night. Not just in her father, but in the hearts of the few who had witnessed that quiet moment. For the first time in years, he walked home with a lighter heart. The night air was cool and his daughter skipped beside him, humming the melody he had just played. He didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time he felt something he hadn't felt in a long while. Hope. The next morning began like every other day, yet something felt different. The janitor woke up before sunrise, just as he always did. The small alarm clock beside his bed rang softly, and he turned it off before it could wake his daughter. The apartment was quiet, with only the faint sounds of the city coming from outside. Cars in the distance, a dog barking, someone calling out from a nearby shop. He sat on the edge of his bed for a moment, rubbing his hands together. His fingers still tingled slightly from the piano keys the night before. He hadn't played like that in years, yet the feeling had stayed with him. The sound of the notes. The way they seemed to fill not just the hall, but something inside him that had been empty for so long. He looked over at his daughter, sleeping peacefully, her small arm tucked under her pillow. She always looked so calm, so safe. That sight gave him strength every single day. He got up quietly, made breakfast, and packed her school lunch just as he always did. But as he placed the sandwich into her small bag, he caught himself smiling for no reason. Something inside him had been woken up again. At work that day, he moved through his duties as usual. The same floors to mop, the same classrooms to clean. But people seemed to look at him differently. Some smiled, others nodded politely, which was unusual. He didn't understand why until the music teacher from the night before passed by and stopped. "Good morning," she said warmly. He nodded, a little nervous. "Morning, ma'am," she smiled. "You played beautifully last night." He looked down quickly, embarrassed. "I'm sorry for that." "I shouldn't have—" "No," she interrupted softly. "You should have. You reminded us what music is really about." Emotion, honesty, not just perfect notes. He didn't know how to respond. For a moment, he just stood there, holding his cleaning cloth tightly. She placed a gentle hand on his arm and said, "Don't hide your gift. People need to hear it." Then she left, leaving him speechless. For the rest of the day, he couldn't stop thinking about her words. He had buried his music for so long that he had almost forgotten it was still inside him. But last night proved that it had never truly left. That evening, after picking up his daughter from school, they stopped at a small park on the way home. The sky was painted with soft shades of orange and pink. She ran ahead, laughing as she chased a few pigeons near the benches. He watched her, smiling quietly. When she came back, a little out of breath, she asked, "Papa, will you play again tonight?" He chuckled softly. "Maybe someday," he said, "but everyone loved it," she said excitedly. "I saw their faces. Even the teacher was listening." He nodded slowly. "I know, but I don't work there to play, sweetheart. I work to clean. That's my job now." She looked at him curiously. "But didn't you say once that you used to play the piano before I was born?" He hesitated for a moment. "Yes," he said quietly. "A long time ago. Why did you stop?" She asked softly. He took a deep breath. The question hit a part of his heart that still hurt to touch. "Because life changed," he said finally. "Sometimes you have to let go of what you love to take care of what you have left." She didn't fully understand, but she nodded gently. "I think you should play again," she whispered. "It makes you happy." He smiled faintly. "Maybe you're right." That night, after she fell asleep, he sat by the small window with a cup of tea in his hand. The moonlight spilled through the glass, lighting up the worn-out furniture and the walls that had seen better days. He thought back to his younger years. The music schools, the late-night practices, the thrill of performing. He had once dreamed of traveling the world as a pianist, sharing his music with people everywhere. He remembered his wife, too. She had always encouraged him, sitting beside him while he played, humming softly along. She used to say, "When you play, I can feel your soul." Those words came back to him now, clear as if she were sitting right there beside him. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he could almost hear her laughter, gentle and full of life. But then he remembered how everything had changed. Her illness had come like a storm, quick and cruel. One day she was fine. The next she was fighting for her life. He spent every cent they had on treatments, selling instruments, taking extra jobs, hoping for a miracle that never came. When she passed away, it broke something deep inside him. After the funeral, he couldn't bear to touch a piano again. Every note reminded him of her voice, her smile, her warmth. Music no longer felt like a blessing. It felt like a wound. He sold his piano, packed up their small home, and focused on his daughter. He promised himself that she would never go hungry, never feel alone. So he took the first job that would hire him, cleaning at the very academy where he once dreamed of performing. The irony wasn't lost on him. He used to imagine standing on that stage under bright lights. Now he scrubbed it when everyone else had gone home, but he didn't complain. His daughter was growing, healthy, and full of life. That was all that mattered. Still, every time he polished the piano, he felt something stir inside him. He'd run his fingers lightly over the keys when no one was watching, just enough to feel their smoothness. Sometimes he'd whisper to himself a maybe one day. That one day had come by accident. His daughter's small voice asking him to play, and his heart unable to say no. And now, after all these years, he realized he missed it deeply. Not the fame or applause, just the feeling of being himself again. The next few days at work, he kept to himself. But something had changed in the way people saw him. Students greeted him respectfully. One or two even asked if he could show them how to play the melody they'd heard that night. He always smiled politely and said, "I just clean here." But deep down, he felt something growing, a quiet sense of belonging. One afternoon, while cleaning the hallway, the academy's director stopped him. The director was a man who rarely spoke to the staff unless it was about work. But this time his tone was different. "I heard about your performance," the director said, adjusting his glasses. "Is it true you used to play professionally?" The janitor hesitated, unsure what to say. "I studied music when I was younger," he said quietly. "But I haven't played in a long time." The director nodded thoughtfully. "You still have it. That kind of emotion can't be taught." He didn't know how to respond. He simply bowed his head and said, "Thank you, sir." Before leaving, the director added, There's a charity concert coming up next month. If you ever feel ready, you should think about performing, not for fame, just for the love of it." After he left, the janitor stood there for a long time staring at the floor. The idea scared him, yet deep down a small spark of excitement flickered. Could he really do it again? Could he play in front of people after all these years? That night, while walking home with his daughter, she noticed his quiet smile. "Papa," she said, "you look happy." He chuckled softly. "Just thinking about something," he replied. "Is it about the piano?" she asked eagerly. He looked at her and nodded. "Maybe," she squeezed his hand. "Then I hope you play again soon." When they reached home, he sat on the couch and took out a small wooden box from the drawer. Inside was an old photograph, him and his wife standing beside a piano, both smiling at the camera. It was taken years ago, back when their future looked bright. He ran his fingers over her face gently, whispering, "Maybe it's time." That night, before going to bed, he closed his eyes and imagined himself back on the stage, his hands moving freely across the keys, his daughter in the front row smiling proudly. For the first time in years, the dream didn't feel impossible. It felt close, like something waiting patiently for him to believe in it again. He didn't know what the coming days would bring. But one thing was certain: the music inside him had woken up and it wasn't going back to sleep. The days that followed were quiet but filled with a strange kind of energy. The janitor's heart felt lighter, almost restless, as if something inside him had been reawakened and was now pushing him toward something he didn't fully understand yet. Every evening when the academy halls emptied, he would pause near the piano again, letting his fingers brush against the keys before continuing with his work. He didn't dare play more than a few notes, but the sound was enough to make him feel alive. His daughter noticed the change in him too. She would wait after school, sitting in the back of the auditorium, quietly watching him work. Sometimes he would hum softly while sweeping, and she would hum along. Their evenings had become their quiet little world, just the two of them and the echo of music that no one else seemed to hear. One Friday evening, the academy held a special rehearsal for the senior students. The air was filled with the sound of chatter, laughter, and nervous energy. The janitor had been assigned to stay late and help tidy up afterward. He didn't mind. He liked being there when everyone else was gone, when the noise faded, and the hall belonged only to silence. That night, though, things didn't go as planned. The rehearsal ended late, and a few of the students stayed behind, laughing loudly as they packed up their instruments. The janitor waited patiently, sweeping the corners near the stage. He heard them joking and teasing each other about their mistakes during practice. One of the students, a boy with a confident voice, said loudly, "You know what's funny? The janitor probably spends more time near that piano than any of us." The others laughed. Another student added, "Yeah, maybe he should give it a try sometime. Let's see what our cleaning expert can do." The janitor smiled politely, pretending he hadn't heard. He was used to jokes like that. He had spent years learning to stay quiet, to let things pass. But then one of the teachers entered the hall, the same one who had seen him play before. She walked toward the group and said calmly, "Be careful with your words. Talent doesn't wear a uniform." The students fell silent, a little embarrassed. The janitor kept sweeping, his face calm, though deep inside her words touched something warm. He appreciated her kindness, but he didn't want attention. He just wanted peace. When everyone finally left, the hall grew still again. The lights dimmed and only the faint glow from the stage lamps remained. His daughter was sitting in the last row, sketching something in her notebook. He called out softly, "We'll go soon, just let me finish here." She nodded, but after a moment she asked quietly, "Papa, can you play something?" "Please, it helps me sleep." He hesitated. He looked around. The piano stood there, its black surface shining faintly under the lights. The lid was open, as if waiting for him. He took a slow breath. "Just a little," he said. He set the mop aside and sat on the bench again. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before pressing down gently. The sound filled the air, went soft, calm, and deep. He started with a simple melody, one he used to play for his wife when she couldn't sleep. His hands moved slowly at first, then with more confidence. The music floated through the empty space like a whisper from another world. His daughter closed her eyes, swaying gently to the rhythm. The janitor smiled softly as he played, feeling her peace mirror his own. For a few minutes, time didn't exist. There was no pain, no past, no struggle, only music. He didn't know that someone else had walked in. The academy director, on his way out, had returned to pick up a forgotten file. As he passed by the hall, the sound stopped him in his tracks. It wasn't the kind of technical perfection he heard from students every day. It was something different, something alive. He stepped quietly into the hall, staying near the back, not wanting to interrupt. The janitor continued playing, his eyes closed, completely lost in the moment. Each note carried emotion, the weight of years, the softness of love, the ache of loss, and the quiet strength that had carried him this far. The director stood still, almost breathless, as he watched this man, someone he had passed countless times without a second thought, turn the hall into something magical. When the music came to an end, silence filled the room again. The janitor opened his eyes slowly, unaware of the quiet figure watching from the shadows. He smiled at his daughter and said, "All done, little one. Play more," she whispered. "Please," he laughed softly. "Tomorrow. We'll go home now." As he began to stand, the director clapped softly, stepping forward. The sound startled him. His daughter turned, surprised. "I'm sorry," the director said, walking toward them. "I didn't mean to scare you. That was beautiful." The janitor quickly stood up, flustered. "Oh, sir. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." The director raised a hand gently. "Don't apologize. You have a gift." He shook his head nervously. "It's nothing, sir. Just an old habit." The director smiled. "Old habits like that don't fade easily. You play with feeling, not just skill." "That's rare." He didn't know what to say. He simply nodded, trying to hide his embarrassment. His daughter looked up at the director with innocent pride. "My papa used to play before," she said softly. "He's really good." The director smiled kindly. "I can see that," he said, then turned to the janitor. "If you ever feel ready, we'd love to hear you play again. Maybe during our open recital next month." The janitor's eyes widened slightly. "Oh no, sir. I couldn't. I'm just staff here. It wouldn't be right." The director's voice was calm but firm. "Talent belongs to no title. Think about it." With that, he nodded politely and left the hall. The janitor stood there, stunned. His daughter tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "You should do it, Papa." He looked down at her. "You really think so?" She nodded eagerly. "Everyone should hear you play." He smiled weakly. "We'll see." That night, as they walked home under the streetlights, he couldn't shake the director's words. Talent belongs to no title. They echoed in his mind again and again. For so long, he had accepted his place quietly, telling himself that dreams were for other people, not for someone like him. But what if that wasn't true? What if it wasn't too late? When they got home, he tucked his daughter into bed, kissed her forehead, and sat by the window again. The city lights glowed outside, and the distant hum of traffic filled the silence. He thought about the piano, about the way it felt to play again, how his fingers seemed to remember everything, how his heart had felt lighter afterward. He closed his eyes and imagined himself standing on that stage, not as the man with the mop, but as someone whole again, someone who had found his way back to what he loved. The thought scared him, but it also gave him hope. The next morning, he woke up early, even before his alarm. The sky was still dark, but he felt wide awake. After sending his daughter to school, he stopped by a small pawn shop on his way to work. Inside, among dusty shelves and old instruments, stood an upright piano, scratched, out of tune, but still beautiful in its own way. He ran his fingers along the keys, pressing one softly. The sound was dull, uneven. Still, it made him smile. "How much?" he asked quietly. The shop owner looked up. "That one? It's old. Hardly anyone wants it. You can take it cheap." He hesitated, thinking of his budget, but then he thought of his daughter, of her face when he played, of the music teacher's words, of the director's kindness. He reached for his wallet. "I'll take it." That evening, with the help of a friend from work, he brought the piano home. It barely fit in the small apartment, but his daughter's excitement made it all worth it. She ran her hands across the keys, laughing. "It's perfect," she said. He smiled. "It's not much, but it's ours." That night after dinner, he sat down to play again. The keys were stiff, some notes out of tune, but he didn't care. He played anyway, quietly at first, then louder, his fingers moving with growing confidence. His daughter sat beside him, her head resting on his arm. For the first time in years, Their little home was filled with music, not from a concert hall, not from a stage, but from a heart rediscovering itself. And as he played, he realized something simple yet powerful. The music had never left him. It had only been waiting for him to believe he still deserved it. The days leading up to the recital passed quietly, yet something inside the janitor was changing. For the first time in many years, he felt alive again. He had been practicing at home every night after his daughter went to sleep. The old piano he bought from the pawn shop wasn't perfect. Some keys were out of tune and a few made a hollow sound. But it was his. It felt like a friend who had come back after years apart. Every evening when the world grew silent, he sat before it, closing his eyes before his fingers touched the keys. At first his hands felt stiff, but soon they began to remember. The music returned slowly, like a forgotten language being spoken again. And as he played, he felt something inside him heal. His daughter would sometimes stay awake, peeking from her room, listening with a sleepy smile. She didn't say much, but he could tell that hearing him play made her happy. The melodies filled their small home, turning the quiet nights into something magical. At work, the whispers had started. Word had spread about how the janitor had once been a musician. Some people were curious, others doubtful. A few of the students looked at him differently now, not as the man who swept the halls, but as someone who carried a story they didn't know. One afternoon, while he was cleaning the corridor, the music teacher approached him. She smiled warmly and said, "I hope you're thinking about what the director suggested." He looked up, confused. "The recital?" She nodded. "Yes, I think you should do it. You don't have to be perfect. Just be yourself. People need to hear that." He hesitated. "I haven't performed in so many years. What if I forget? What if I embarrass myself?" The teacher shook her head gently. "You won't. Music like yours doesn't come from practice, it comes from the heart." Her words stayed with him long after she left. That night, as he walked home under the pale glow of streetlights, he thought about what she said. Maybe it wasn't about perfection anymore. Maybe it was about sharing something true. The recital was set for the following week. It was a small charity event to raise money for local children's music programs. Teachers, students, and guests would attend. But it wasn't a grand stage like before. It was more intimate, more personal. Still, for him, it felt huge. The day of the recital arrived faster than he expected. He woke early that morning, his heart already racing. He made breakfast quietly, pretending to be calm so his daughter wouldn't notice. But she saw it anyway. "You're nervous," she said with a playful grin. He smiled weakly. "A little." "You'll be amazing," she said confidently. "I know it." Her faith in him gave him courage. He dressed neatly, his uniform freshly pressed. He still had to work before the event, but today his steps felt lighter. Every mop stroke, every polished surface, it all felt like part of something meaningful. When evening came, the academy hall began to fill with people. Students chatted excitedly, teachers arranged their sheet music, and families settled into their seats. The stage lights glowed softly, casting golden reflections across the polished piano at the center. He stood quietly at the back, holding a small cloth in his hand, pretending to check the stage one last time. In truth, he was trying to steady his nerves. His daughter sat in the front row, her face glowing with pride. When she caught his eye, she gave him a little thumbs up. The event began. One by one, students performed, some with violins, others with cellos, flutes, and guitars. The audience clapped politely after each performance. The atmosphere was warm and encouraging. When the final student finished, the director stepped up to the microphone. "Before we end tonight's recital," he said, "we have one last performer. Someone who reminds us that music belongs to everyone, not just to those who study it." The janitor froze. His hands trembled slightly. The director smiled toward him. "Please welcome our very own stage caretaker. Tonight he will share something special with us." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some people looked surprised, others curious. His daughter sat up straighter, clapping the loudest. The teacher near the stage nodded at him encouragingly. He walked slowly toward the piano, each step echoing in the silent hall. The lights seemed brighter than usual. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him. For a brief moment he thought about turning back. But then he looked at his daughter. Her little face was glowing with pride. That was all the courage he needed. He sat down at the piano. The seat felt familiar yet strange, as if he had come home after years away. He placed his fingers on the keys, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes. The first note was soft, almost shy. But it carried. The second followed, then another. Soon the melody began to unfold. The audience leaned in, quiet, captivated. There was something in the way he played, something honest, raw, and filled with emotion. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply telling his story through music, the story of a man who had lost everything and found it again in the sound of a piano. Each note carried a memory, the joy of young love, the pain of losing it, the long nights of struggle, the laughter of his daughter, and the quiet hope that had kept him going. His hands moved naturally, gracefully, as if they had been waiting years for this moment. The hall was silent except for the music. Even those who didn't know much about piano could feel what he was expressing. The melody rose and fell like waves, soft and strong all at once. It wasn't a song from any book. It was his own creation, born from years of silence. When he reached the final note, it lingered in the air for a few seconds before fading completely. Then came the silence, a deep emotional silence. For a moment no one moved. Then slowly the applause began, soft at first, then growing louder until the hall was filled with clapping and cheers. Some stood up, others whistled, and a few wiped their eyes. He sat there stunned, overwhelmed. He hadn't expected that kind of reaction. He looked toward the front row and saw his daughter standing on her seat, clapping with both hands, her eyes shining with tears. He smiled through his own tears, bowing his head slightly. The director came forward again, speaking into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, that is the sound of life, of resilience, love, and hope. Let this remind us that music is not about who you are, but what you feel." The audience applauded again. The janitor stood, bowed humbly, and walked off the stage. His daughter ran up and hugged him tightly.
"You did it, Papa,"
she said, her voice full of pride. He hugged her back, whispering, "I did it for you." That night, as they walked home together, the stars seemed brighter. He carried his daughter on his shoulders, and she kept singing the melody he had played, her voice soft and sweet. "Do you think they liked it?" he asked quietly. She laughed. "They loved it. You made everyone smile. Even the serious people were clapping." He chuckled softly. "I guess I did." When they reached their small apartment, he placed her gently in bed. Before turning off the light, she said, "Can you play again tomorrow?" He smiled. "Of course, as long as you're listening." After she fell asleep, he sat by the piano, still in his work clothes. He looked at the worn keys and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't just to the piano, it was to life, for giving him one more chance to feel alive. That night, as the moonlight touched the piano's surface, he played once more quietly, softly, for no audience at all, only for himself. The music carried through the night, out the open window, into the sleeping city. And though the world didn't know it, somewhere in a small apartment, a man who once cleaned stages had just stepped back into the light, one note at a time. The night after the recital, the janitor could barely sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he could still hear the echo of applause in his ears. He had never imagined that something like this would happen again in his life. He had gone on that stage expecting nothing, no recognition, no praise. He just wanted to share something real, but now it felt like the world had shifted slightly. For years he had walked those same hallways unseen, cleaning up after others, invisible in plain sight. But after that performance, people had looked at him differently, not with pity but with respect. The next morning, when he arrived at the academy, something unusual happened. As he walked through the main entrance, some students smiled and waved. One of them even said, "Sir, that was amazing last night." He paused, unsure how to respond, and simply nodded with a shy smile. It was strange being noticed. For years he had tried to stay out of sight, quiet, humble, doing his job. But now it felt like he had accidentally opened a door he didn't know existed. When he entered the hall, the piano was still there, gleaming softly under the morning light. It felt different now, like it was waiting for him. He placed his hand gently on the polished surface, remembering the feeling of the keys beneath his fingers. For a moment he just stood there, letting the silence wrap around him. Then he heard footsteps. The music teacher entered, holding a small cup of coffee. "I was hoping I'd find you here," she said with a smile. He looked up. "I just wanted to make sure everything's in order after last night." She chuckled softly. "You don't need to make excuses. You belong here just as much as any of us." He didn't know what to say. Compliments were hard for him to accept, but there was something kind and genuine in her tone. The director was very impressed, she continued. He said it was the most heartfelt performance of the evening. He even mentioned that we should consider having you play again for the next event. He blinked in surprise. Play again? I don't think, she interrupted gently. You should think about it. People were moved. You gave them something real. That's rare. He stayed quiet for a while, staring at the piano. The idea of performing again scared him, but at the same time it filled him with warmth. For years he had thought his gift was gone, something buried by time and hardship, but now it was alive again. That evening, as he walked home, he noticed something different about his step. The streets felt brighter. Even the cold air didn't bother him. When he reached his apartment, his daughter was waiting at the window, waving excitedly. Papa, Papa, she called. Guess what? He smiled. What is it? She held up a small piece of paper. My teacher said everyone at school is talking about you. She said she saw your video on the Academy's page. He froze. Video? She nodded quickly. Someone recorded your performance. They posted it online. Everyone loves it. He sat down slowly, not sure whether to laugh or worry. He didn't even know he had been filmed. People wrote comments, she continued proudly. They said you played with so much heart. Some even said your music made them cry. He felt a lump in his throat. It was strange how something so personal, something he had played for himself and his daughter, was now touching strangers. Later that night, after she went to bed, he turned on his old phone and searched for the video, and there it was, the full performance with thousands of views. The title read, The Janitor Who Made Everyone Cry with His Piano. He pressed play. Watching himself on screen felt surreal. The man in the video looked older than he remembered, with tired eyes and worn hands. But when the music began, he could see it, the passion, the truth in every note. Scrolling through the comments, he was stunned. People from all over had written kind messages. I felt his pain in every note. He reminded me why I love music. Sometimes, the greatest talents are hidden in plain sight. He leaned back, silent, tears welling in his eyes. For so long he had believed that his best days were behind him. But here on a glowing screen, strangers were telling him otherwise. The next few days were full of small surprises. A local newspaper reached out to the Academy, asking to interview the janitor pianist. Students began greeting him with genuine smiles. Even the director called him into his office, not to discuss cleaning schedules, but to thank him personally. You reminded everyone why we love this place, the director said warmly. You reminded us that music isn't just notes, it's life. He left that office feeling lighter than he had in years. But what meant the most wasn't the attention. It was how proud his daughter was. Every night she asked him to play again before bed, sometimes joining in by humming softly beside him. One evening, as he was putting her to sleep, she asked, Papa, were you always this good? He smiled softly. Once, a long time ago, but I stopped playing after life got hard. She frowned. Why did you stop? You love it so much, he sighed. Sometimes when you lose too much, you forget the things that once made you happy. I thought I didn't deserve it anymore. She sat up, her eyes serious. That's not true. You deserve to be happy, and when you play, you make people happy too. He was quiet for a moment, then kissed her forehead. Thank you, he whispered. After she fell asleep, he sat at the piano again, letting her words sink in. She was right. Maybe happiness wasn't something you waited for. It was something you created, one small moment at a time. A week later, the Academy invited him to play again, this time for a charity fundraiser attended by local sponsors and community members. The hall would be full of important people, but he didn't feel the same fear he had before. He wasn't playing for them. He was playing for his daughter, for himself, and for everyone who had forgotten their own dreams. On the night of the event, he wore the same simple clothes, clean and pressed. When he walked on stage, the audience applauded even before he played. Some recognized him from the video. The director introduced him warmly and then stepped aside. He sat at the piano and looked around. The hall was filled with people, faces full of curiosity and kindness. But in the front row, he saw the only face that truly mattered, his daughter's. He began to play. This time, the music felt even deeper. It carried not just sadness, but hope. Every note was a reminder that it's never too late to begin again. The melody built slowly, then soared, filling the hall with something pure and powerful. By the time he finished, the entire audience was on their feet. The applause was thunderous, echoing through the hall. People cheered, some even shouted his name. He stood up, bowing humbly, his heart full. He didn't crave fame or attention. What he felt was something far greater, a sense of peace, of belonging. Afterward, several people approached him to shake his hand, praising his music and his story. But the moment that meant the most came when his daughter ran up and hugged him tightly. "You did it again," she said proudly. "You made everyone feel what I feel when you play." He smiled, holding her close. "Then that's all that matters." Later that night, they walked home together, hand in hand. The streets were quiet, the air cool. He looked up at the sky, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Freedom. He realized then that life had given him a second chance, not just to play music, but to live fully again. The next morning, when he returned to the academy, he wasn't just the janitor anymore. Students greeted him like an old friend. Teachers nodded respectfully, and the piano in the hall seemed to wait for him each day. But he didn't let it change who he was. He still swept the floors, still cleaned the stage, still smiled quietly as people walked by. Only now there was a light in his eyes, a quiet strength that came from knowing he had found himself again. And every time his daughter ran into his arms after school, laughing and asking for another song, he knew that was the real reward. Because sometimes, the world doesn't need another star. It just needs one honest soul to remind everyone what beauty sounds like when it comes from the heart. The weeks after the fundraiser changed everything for the janitor. What had begun as a single moment of courage was now rippling through his life in ways he never imagined. The music he once buried in silence had found its way into the world again, and people were listening. Every morning when he arrived at the academy, someone would greet him with a smile. Some students asked for piano tips, others wanted to hear him play again. He wasn't used to attention, but he accepted it with quiet humility. He still wore the same uniform, still carried his mop and broom, still worked hard as before. But now something about him seemed different. He had become a quiet inspiration to everyone around him. People whispered stories about him in the hallways, about the janitor who could make people cry with a single melody. Some of the younger students even began calling him Maestro behind his back, a nickname that made him laugh softly whenever he overheard it. But what touched him most was how happy his daughter had become. She walked around with pride in her eyes, always telling her friends, "My papa plays the piano at the academy." She had started taking music more seriously, too, often sitting beside him while he practiced at home. Her little fingers danced clumsily across the keys, but the joy in her face made every wrong note beautiful. One chilly morning, while he was polishing the stage floor, the academy director entered the hall holding a few papers. "You have a minute?" the director asked kindly. He stood up quickly. "Of course, sir," the director smiled. "There's something we'd like to discuss. After your last performance, several people reached out to us, some local organizations, even a small music foundation. They're interested in working with you." He frowned in confusion. "Work with me? I don't understand." The director handed him the papers. "They want to organize a community concert. They think your story could inspire others, especially children who don't have access to music education. They want you to perform and maybe teach." He froze for a moment, looking down at the papers in disbelief. "Teach? But I'm just a janitor." The director shook his head firmly. "You're more than that. You've reminded all of us why music matters. You have something that can't be taught in books. You have heart." He didn't know what to say. For years, his hands had scrubbed floors and emptied trash bins. The thought of them guiding children toward music felt unreal. That night, he sat by the piano, the papers spread before him. His daughter watched from across the table, her chin resting on her hands. "Are you going to do it, Papa?" she asked softly. He looked at her, unsure. "I don't know if I can," she smiled. "You can do anything. You taught me that." He chuckled quietly. "When did I teach you that?" "When you played that night," she said. "You showed me that even when life gets hard, you can still do something beautiful." Her words hit him deeply. He leaned back, closing his eyes. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was what he was meant to do. Not to return to his old life as a performer, but to help others find their own music. The next day, he gave his answer. "I'll do it," he told the director simply. And just like that, a new chapter began. The Academy helped him plan a small community event, a night of hope, they called it. It would feature performances from students, local musicians, and, of course, the janitor himself. The proceeds would go toward buying instruments for children who couldn't afford them. When the announcement went out, people were excited. Posters with his photo, a shy man standing beside a piano, appeared around town. The story of the janitor pianist had already captured hearts, and now it was becoming something larger than he could ever imagine. The weeks leading up to the concert were filled with preparation. He practiced daily, not to impress but to give his best. He worked with students after hours, helping them with simple techniques and encouraging them to play with feeling, not just precision. The children adored him. They would gather around after school, laughing and learning together. At home, his daughter would listen to him practice and sometimes join in. They had started creating little duets together, simple songs full of warmth and laughter. For the first time in years, their small apartment felt like a home filled with life again. When the day of the community concert arrived, the entire town seemed to show up. The hall was packed, and even people who didn't know much about music came to watch the man whose story had touched so many hearts. He stood backstage, his daughter beside him, holding his hand tightly. She was wearing a little dress, her eyes shining with excitement. "Are you nervous, Papa?" she asked. He smiled. "A little." She squeezed his hand. "Don't be. You always say music is like talking to the heart. Just talk to them." He chuckled softly. "You're smarter than me, you know that?" Before he could say more, the lights dimmed and the announcer called his name. The applause that followed was overwhelming. As he walked onto the stage, the sight of all those faces watching him made his heart pound. But then he looked toward the front row, and there she was, smiling at him, her little hands clasped together. He took a deep breath, sat at the piano, and began to play. The piece he chose was something new, something he had written over the past few weeks. It was called Home. It told his story without words, the struggle, the loss, the rediscovery of hope. The melody started slow, almost fragile, then grew stronger, warmer, brighter. As he played, he could feel the room quieting, the audience holding its breath. The music seemed to lift everyone together, wrapping them in emotion. By the final note, there wasn't a sound in the hall, just the quiet hum of hearts that had been moved. Then came the applause, long, standing, thunderous. People were cheering, clapping, some wiping their eyes. But he didn't look at them right away. He looked at his daughter, who was clapping the loudest, tears streaming down her face. He smiled, bowed his head, and whispered under his breath, "This one was for you." After the concert, several people came to meet him, teachers, parents, even strangers. They thanked him for his music, for his story, for reminding them that dreams never really die. One woman said, "You made me want to play again. I haven't touched my violin in 20 years, but tonight I will." Another man added, "You reminded me that it's never too late to start over." Hearing their words, he realized something. The music wasn't just healing him anymore, it was healing others. In the following months, the small concert led to more opportunities. He was invited to play at local events, community centers, even schools. But no matter how many people listened, he never lost his humility. He still worked at the academy, still cleaned the floors, still greeted everyone with a gentle smile. But now there was purpose in his every step. He began teaching a few children for free on weekends, using old pianos donated by the academy. His daughter often helped, sitting with the younger ones, showing them how to press the keys gently. Those weekends became the highlight of his life. One afternoon, after finishing a lesson, he looked around the small group of children laughing and playing music together. The sound of their joy filled the room, and he felt something shift inside him, a deep, quiet contentment. He thought about how far he had come, from a man who once believed his music was lost forever, to someone helping others find their own voices. As the sun set through the window, he sat at the piano once more. His daughter came over, sitting beside him. "What are you thinking, Papa?" she asked. He smiled softly. "I was just thinking, life is like a song. Sometimes it slows down, sometimes it gets quiet. But if you keep playing, it always finds its way back to the melody." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I like that." He placed his hand on hers, guiding her fingers to the keys. Together they played a gentle tune, simple, pure, full of love. The room filled with the sound of two hearts speaking the same language, one that didn't need words, and in that moment, he realized something beautiful. He had never really lost his purpose. It had only been waiting quietly for him to believe again. Outside, the stars began to appear. The world moved on as it always did, but inside that little room, a father and daughter created something timeless, a reminder that even from the humblest places, greatness can rise, and that sometimes, the most beautiful music comes from those who have known silence the longest. And from that day on, the man who once cleaned the stage didn't just keep it shining. He filled it with music that would never fade.